Welcome to another episode of the Film Scene, and thank you for joining us. As always, every week, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we go around the world and bring you an inspiring and innovative filmmaker who's making a difference, doing things in the film industry, and is excited to share these tips and techniques with you. This week, we have an amazing young lady who has a degree in digital media and journalism and is making an immense impact on the film industry in the United States and in Canada. She's making a great impact on social change. She's making a fantastic impact with her journalistic and special effects skills, and she has some amazing techniques that she uses that she's excited to share with you. And I'm so excited to have her on, coming to you live from New York City, the Big Apple, Miss Ashley DeLeon. Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thanks for agreeing to come on the show and share your knowledge. How are you doing there in New York?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I love talking everything and anything film, special effects related. So I'm honored that you're having me for not only one show, but for two. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And it's because you have so many things that you're doing: animation, streaming, digital art, video editing. And I love the fact that you're using your skills for change. It's really warming to see, because in today's society, everybody's afraid, of consequences. Your primary focus, I've noticed, is documentary. You're a documentarian. So my question to you is, why documentaries?
So I kind of had an interesting way of getting into documentary filmmaking. So when I first declared my major back in 2019, I actually wanted nothing to do with anything visual. I wanted to stay on the journalism track, just do writing. I did not want to touch a camera. I did not want to do any digital art, but I was actually required to take a class in digital media. But I was like, you know what? I have to be here, so I'm just going to keep an open mind. Maybe I'll like it. And I ended up absolutely loving it. Loved it so
Hmm.
much. I was like, wow, it's crazy that you can actually tell stories that people can see, in colors and images rather than just words. And I just, was doing a lot of digital art. It kept me sane, during lockdown for all those months. And I started to intern at different publications. And although, yeah, I was good at the writing, something just felt missing. I just didn't have that creative outlet. I just didn't really feel fulfilled. So that's when my professor proposed to me. He was like, "Well, why don't you try one of my video classes?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I don't know about that, but again, let me go in with an open mind and let me try it." And I ended up loving it. I
Right.
mean, I wasn't great at it when I
Hmm.
first started, but I knew that with time I would get better because it combines all of those things that I love: the visual aspect, being able to be colorful and creative, being able to tell important stories, which is why I loved journalism so much. And just being able
Hmm.
to combine that and package it into something really beautiful was very important to me and still is.
Right, right. And I noticed that with your documentaries, you gravitate towards the underrepresented sector of society, people who seem to be forgotten or lost in the mainstream, and you target that, and you go after that to highlight it. Why is that?
For two different reasons. One, that was my experience as a person of color living in Vermont for 4 years.
Hmm.
Vermont, it's not a very diverse state. And, living in New York City, I didn't really have to deal with the feeling of feeling other until I got there. And I started having experiences that I never even had while I was at home. And as I started to meet other people, even other people of color, I was hearing them share their stories of things that they were experiencing in Vermont. And it kind of made me question. I was like, wait, no one's talking about this. And because I have that journalism bug inside of me, I was like, wait, why not do stories on underrepresented communities? Because our stories deserve to be told just as much as the majority. So that's one
Hmm.
reason why I have that lens. The second is
Hmm.
based on just my dad's career. He is a doctor. He serves primarily underrepresented communities here in the Bronx. He's a podiatrist, so he treats a lot of diabetic patients. And just hearing their stories of how diabetes has impacted them and their lives, it was heartbreaking, but at the same time it made me frustrated because these just aren't stories that you see or hear in mainstream media. So again, that propelled me further to focus on underrepresented communities, because their stories deserve to be told and heard.
Now, in one of your clips, in one of your documentaries, one of the people that you interviewed said something that really kind of touched something inside me. And she said, television has become our new way of identifying, and definitely so in this digital media, it has definitely become that. And she said, when you look at a television and you don't see yourself represented, it changes the way you view yourself, your social, your constructed identity. Now, this was an interesting perspective. I hadn't really thought about that. I've heard it, said here and there. Oh, we don't have enough people of color television. We don't have enough this, and I never really thought of it in terms of your identity. How does that affect the way you children, for instance, how does it affect how we construct our identity? And especially because since the Second World War, where television became the babysitter, we push children quite a bit in front of television. So it's really something to think about. So is that why you decided to tackle that issue?
Yeah, I'd say that there was definitely that self-serving purpose. So when I was a kid, there was some representation on TV, but I didn't see a lot of mixed people on television. So
Hmm.
it was already kind of hard enough just trying to understand, what does it mean to have a mixed identity, and not really seeing that on TV. Things are just very black and white. You're either this or you're that, but it's not this and. Um, so yeah, I was really interested in identity, and that's why when I conducted interviews for that web documentary, I asked my sources about identity. How does identity and television, how do they coincide? How does that affect a child's understanding of how they view themselves?
Hmm. Hmm. Do you think identity, and I'm sure there's a connection. I want to know your perspective. The connection between identity and mood. What is the connection there? How I view myself and my mood, how I present myself. I know there's a connection. I'm curious. And the reason I'm asking is because when we look at your next clip, you use a lot of color in what you do. And so I want to see it from your lens, how you're seeing this. How are you putting it together?
Is there a connection between identity and mood? That's a big question. My personal opinion, I think so. Like when I see
Hmm.
someone on screen who looks like me, especially, as I started to grow, it made me happy. It's like, oh wow, I feel seen. I'm seeing people who look like me on a screen. So I would definitely say yes, to that question. Like when I would see people who are of mixed descent, on television, it did give me, a little boost of happiness, because I feel
Hmm.
like, especially as young people, we put so much of our self worth into media. For example, whatever the newest trends are with body shape or fashion or hair, we assess our worth based on what we see on a screen. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a connection between identity and mood. But that is something I'd love to explore further.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure there is a connection. For instance, you feel invisible when you don't see yourself represented in the primary image maker. Let's put it that way. So
Yeah.
I thought of that and I thought, yeah. And I thought, if indeed you don't, you feel invisible when you present in society, you sort of want to hide, or you're not as bold or as confident. So I think there is, I know there is that connection. I was just curious to know because what I see you do quite a bit is it's as if you paint in colors and a lot of things, and that could be your cinematographic background coming out, but then also as a journalist, because when we think journalism, we think someone who collects the facts. They shouldn't interpret it. Nowadays, journalism, they do. But you collect the facts, you get the objective facts, and you tell a story. You tell a story in a very objective way. But what you're doing is a visual and colorful telling of the story. So I'm curious to know if this is cognizant for you of how you tell your story in color.
Yeah, so telling my stories in color, so that stems from, having the digital art background, but also having that keen interest in journalism and just figuring out, okay, how can I combine the two and make it enjoyable, make it feel authentic? So I think about, musicians. Their songs evoke certain emotions. And sometimes, if you were to give yourself the question, if you're listening to a song, can I associate a color with it? You might be able to do that. Maybe the song evokes a sense of angst or anger, and so you're thinking red, or maybe it's a bit mysterious or melancholy, and you're thinking blue, or we can sometimes tend to associate colors with mood. And in journalism and lots of classes, they're always telling you, you know, your tone is important. And even in film, tone, what, mood do you want to evoke from your audience? How do you want them to feel? So rather than just doing that with pull quotes and footage and archival footage, I thought, well, why not just do it with color? That kind of brings an artistic twist
Hmm.
to it. And that's how I
Hmm.
arrived at the concept for Inside Voice. It was definitely more on the experimental side of documentary film. You don't really see a lot of documentaries that play around with color to that extent. But I thought that it was
Hmm.
definitely something important to do to show people that, we can do so many different things with documentary. We don't have to hold it into this pre constructed mold of the
Black and
beginning, the
white. Yeah.
middle, the end, and
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm. Hmm. So I'm glad I asked that because your twist on it was different to what I interpreted. When I watched that film, I thought that the use of color was sort of reflecting the actor's mood in that moment because I noticed you stayed with a particular color the beginning and the end, and in the middle when things were fantastic the coloration changed. So now, but now you're saying this is the mood you want the audience. It's more emotive. You want the audience to kind of feel that. But I guess in filmmaking that is consistent. What's going on in the film, you want your audience to feel that, to share that, right?
Yeah, and I think it's actually, I mean, it really is a mix
Hmm.
of both. Like a lot of those
Right.
shots were filmed in between interview segments because her and I actually did a very long interview. It was about an hour long. And then every 20 minutes or so, I'd
Hmm.
be like, okay, like let's take a break. Let's get some fun footage. I didn't want to fatigue her too much. And
Hmm.
I, we would go back and forth with colors. So when it comes to interviewing anyone, I am very big on collaboration because, that person is a storyteller and you're the vessel for that story to be told. So we'd flip through different
Hmm.
colors. And if she told me that something felt right, we would stick with that. And the blue really resonated with her. For many
Hmm.
reasons, there were a lot of sad parts to her story, especially what happened in Nashville when the pandemic cut her music career in Tennessee very short. That was pretty sad. But also the blue and the fog effects that I added in because we cannot have fog machines in a studio. It evoked a sense of
Hmm.
mystery. And a big thing in film now that they're teaching us in classes is that people have such a short attention span that you need to really be careful with how you're crafting the beginning to make sure that your viewers can actually stick with you and they're not clicking out after 15 seconds. So I also
Hmm.
wanted to give in that sense of mystery because if you make it mysterious enough, well, people are probably not going to click away. They might actually want to keep on watching to know more about what the film is and who Grace is and learn more about her story.
Okay, so are you saying that you use, because I noticed you use a lot of, excuse me, light and shade, and you played with that balance. And in some parts, there's actually half like half the face getting nice light and half in a shade, and also half one color, half the other color. So I hear you saying that you're using it to create mystery rather than more something cinematographic.
Definitely. Like of course, I wanted to add the cinematographic elements to it, which is why I had her angled a little bit, looking a bit off camera. I wanted to add those production techniques because I wanted everything to be clean, but I wanted to also allude to the fact that yeah, there's a lot of mystery, and a little bit of sadness, but also bittersweetness. She's although things in Nashville didn't work out, you'll know towards the end of the film, she's just very happy with where her life is right now. And I didn't want this to be like a doom and gloom documentary about how something didn't work out. It's how, you know, a negative life experience reshaped her life and put her on a different path that she's very happy with. So it's kind of, I guess, trying to allude to, I guess, that bittersweet happy ending by using the split lighting. And I actually achieved that through using, because that's a very common question I get when people watch it. They're like, well, how did you get the two different colors? And I had her angled and I had two different LED lights. So I put them a few feet apart from each other, and I just had one that was blue. The blue that was facing more towards the camera, and then the red on the other side, just because the red was very bright. And had I let the red have a lot more space onto the camera, it would have been a bit much, a bit overwhelming on the eye. So I wanted to do that split lighting effect to kind of show people there's that bittersweetness, but also give it a different artistic feel than what people are used to seeing.
I know you won some awards on this piece, didn't you?
Yeah. So recently, I was grateful to be named a finalist for the Best Super Short Film Award at the Student World Impact Film Festival, which is actually the largest student film festival in the world. And that really meant a lot because that showed that, what I'm doing, it's not just working for me, the people that I'm featuring, but it's also working for other people. It's also getting their minds turning about, what is film. And I was grateful to receive some feedback from the judges, and all of it was about just the sense of mystery. A lot of them talks about mystery and color and being able to manipulate the color to enhance the story. And that's exactly what I was aiming for. So I'm really glad that that resonated across the board.
And it worked wonderfully well. So I'm going to roll the clip so that everyone can see what we're talking about.
Is having people think that I want it to be all about me.
Identity seems to be at the core of everything you do. Searching for an identity, people wanting to feel seen, heard, and so that they can identify with their community, with others, with what's happening with them. So it's really at the core of everything that you're doing. So tell me why this piece really comes home for you.
I'd say for two different reasons. So for me, it's just a full circle for all the things that I love. It's the art, it's the storytelling, it's the video, it's the creative freedom to paint a story and not have, other editors be like, no, well, this is how your beginning has to be. Because that's how journalism is. A reporter's story is greatly influenced by not only the publication but also the editors who look at their story. But for this, I had complete creative freedom and control, and just working with the person I was interviewing. So that way we can work on this together. So that had a lot of meaning that, my creative freedom wasn't, I guess, being distorted or manipulated by anyone else. That's one. Two, combining the art and storytelling, that was big for me. But also, so the person I profiled is actually one of my best friends. And I've always, gone to her shows in Burlington, which is one of the main cities in Vermont where she would do a lot of shows. And she's such a wonderful singer. And as we got closer and I got to know her more, she would tell me about how, she ended up in Vermont. And, her story, it was just very inspiring to me because a lot of the time, in mainstream media, when you see profile videos of musicians, it's all about how people make it seem like it's so smooth sailing, like it's so perfect, like, oh yeah, I just did A, B, and I got to C, and I had no problems, and that's not reality. And Grace was just so open to talking about how difficult it was and just owning up to the fact, like saying, yeah, it really didn't work out, but I'm happy where I'm at now. And I think that message in and of itself resonates with people from all different backgrounds. And you don't have to be a musician. We've all tried something in life, we've all taken a shot at something, and for one reason or another, it just didn't work out. But, other great things come into your life, and you realize, that happened for a reason, because if I didn't have that negative experience, I wouldn't be where I am now. And I just found that to be so powerful. And because she was so open to sharing her story, I think that really, it really worked for people, especially, and bringing it into more of a subtopic of just going to school. Grace had actually deferred her enrollment to college because of wanting to pursue music in Nashville, and she was actually very hesitant to even go to college after things didn't work out. But then she just said, you know what, I'm just gonna try this out. I'm gonna try it, at least say that I did it. And she's so happy with where she's at, and she didn't even know she had a passion for environmentalism until she got to school. Um, so yeah, there's also that piece too, where it's just like, you don't know if something is or isn't for you, unless you try it sometimes.
I think it goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning, that people are so afraid. Uh, you talk about her vulnerability in this and her willingness to open about it. And I think that's really what makes it relatable, and that's what makes her human. And that's what humanizes these types of stories, the documentaries. And this is one of the reasons I like documentaries, because we're not afraid to show what I call the mess.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to paint the perfect picture so that you don't know that they had struggles, or you didn't see their beginnings where it was a mess. And we all feel so afraid, we want to show ourselves in the perfect light, that it gives a distorted vision of what success is, because success is a mountain of failure in its wake. That's really what it is. It's you having the courage and everything else to plow through all the times you fail and just keep doing it. And I think it really does more damage to society than it does good, because when people start to do things and they encounter those failures, they fall, they just drop out, because somewhere in their brain they're thinking this is not how it should be. But that is exactly how it should be. You know,
Yeah.
you cannot walk before you creep. So it's really warming to see it, and it's really warming that this is something that you do in your films, that you really want to show that whole evolution, rather than, hey, let's paint you in this wonderful, you're a star now, you're doing fantastic. So this is why I feel that this production has been so successful for you.
Thank you. And yeah, I really just, one of the main messages, I feel like there's so much you can take away from that film, but just not being afraid to fail. Just at
Hmm.
anything, they always say rejection is projection, rejection is redirection. And it's so true. Certain doors
Yeah.
close so that way you can see which ones are meant to be open. And I think we need to normalize failure and rejection. It's simply just a
Hmm.
part of life. Nothing is supposed to be
Exactly.
perfect. And I think like the more we can normalize that, the less distressing it can be for people, especially younger
Hmm.
people who are always, glued to social media thinking, okay, my life has to jump from A to B to C with no hurdles, no bumps in the road. Everything has to be perfect. And just saying, hey, this is actually how life works. Nothing's going to be perfect, but
Hmm.
that's totally fine. It's just, part of your story and a part of the way how things are.
In filmmaking, as in documentary, there's aimless filmmaking, and then there's purposeful and aggressive filmmaking. It's same thing with documentaries. Like, you can just run the tape and hope that you capture something along the way, or you can have a plan, and you this is what you've gone to school for. You have very careful planning. Everything that you do is very carefully thought out, and there's reason behind it. Give the future documentarians three tips that can be exemplified in your production here as to what they need to be doing, because You can have documentary that sit like a paperweight in your computer, or you can have documentary like this that are winning awards around the world. Tell them in three tips what they can do to make purposeful, award winning documentaries.
So, number one, pre production is actually the most important part to creating any film, especially documentary. And that is not something that a lot of filmmakers like to hear because we love to be behind the camera, we love to get our hands onto the editing. People don't really like sitting, on a screen typing out film treatments. But that is the most
Mm-hmm.
important step because you need to have it super duper thought out, what you want this film to be about. And you can do a lot of pre production through pre interviews. So before the big day, when you have that person, in the studio or wherever you plan on filming, do a pre interview, have a phone call, and it doesn't need to be an hour long. It can be 10 to 20 minutes, but just start the conversation and be transparent with your person and say, hey, this is the direction I was thinking for the film. What are your thoughts on this? Does this feel true to you? Because authenticity is a very important part of any production, especially if you're going to be profiling someone. Because if the
Mm-hmm.
film is not authentic to the person, viewers are not stupid. They're gonna know if you're just throwing together a bunch of fancy techniques to make something look pretty. And quite frankly, those are some of my least favorite films when it just looks pretty, but there's no meaning. It's like
Right,
opening a chip
right.
bag with no chips in it. Like there's nothing. Um, I mean,
And
it's
I,
so
and I
true.
do and I do love some good chips. Okay, good
Thank
analogy.
you. Thank you. So yeah, just making sure you have that planned out, but also having a shot list. So for those of you who may not have studied film in school, one of the important elements of filmmaking is having what's called a film treatment. So you start your film
Mm-hmm.
treatment with what's called a log line. So a log line is a 1 to 2 sentence description that encapsulates your entire film. And don't go over those 1 to 2 sentences. And the reason why they have you keep it short is because when you pitch it to production companies, they want it to be short. But also for you as a filmmaker, you should be able to summarize your film very succinctly. You may not be able to get every detail in that 1 to 2 sentences, but that's important. And then having
Mm-hmm.
your shot list, these are the angles that I want to get. These are the kinds of environments that I want to film. I want to make sure I have the extreme close ups, the middle shots,
Mm-hmm.
close ups, wide angles, making sure you have that visual variety. And then you have your act one, two, and three, and you could have
Mm-hmm.
more acts in a film. I mean, usually the standard is just, your 3 acts, your beginning, middle, and end. And, being able to write that out is a very essential step because you're actually going to get so many ideas from pre production and you have a plan going into the interview and into the filming. The worst thing
Mm-hmm.
that could happen to a filmmaker is when you get there and you don't have a super big plan and then you're editing footage and you're like, oh, I should have gotten a shot of this. Oh, why didn't I ask this question? That happens when you don't prepare. um,
Right, right.
so I'd say that was a long one, but number one,
It's
that's really
okay.
important. The second thing, lighting is very crucial when you're filming. You
Mm-hmm.
use too much light, it's very hard to make your film look a little bit more normal. If it's too dark and you have to bring up the gain, it can look grainy. So pay attention to light, and you don't always need to have a big fancy lighting kit. And I know I say that knowing I did use some big fancy lights for my film, but natural light
Mm-hmm.
is a great tool to use. Filming your source near some open windows or outside. If you're filming outside, cloudy weather actually is ideal because you don't get too much sun and you get some nice even lighting on the face. So
Mm-hmm.
just pay attention to lighting and the how the lighting will affect the tone of your film. So if you have a lot of warm lighting, what mood is that evoking? If you have a lot of cool lighting, and that could be incidental, maybe it was just super cloudy when you were filming, but how is that affecting how your viewers are interpreting your work? So that is a very important thing to be conscious of. And finally, balance. And this can be really hard,
Mm-hmm.
especially for those of us who are super camera happy, love editing, and we just want to dive into the artistic curation of the piece, but the storyline is always going to be your most important part. It is so important. When I was
Mm-hmm.
making Inside Voice, that was the first super duper high production value film I've ever made. Like I've never made anything that looked that pretty. So I found myself spending so much time on the aesthetics and making sure things looked good. But my earlier versions of the film, I was not satisfied with how pieces of the storyline were missing. I was like, this is not it. And people would be like, oh, but it's so beautiful. I'm like, it's not finished. Like, it's not a finished story. Like, there's
Hmm.
stuff missing. This needs work. So make sure you strike that balance. As much as it's fun to spend hours, color grading and making sure things look pretty, the storyline always comes first. So give yourself a lot of
Right.
time and make sure you divvy up the time where you can give a lot of attention to both.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because I have also watched pieces where, and I think I'm above average person. I can interpret something. So you look at it and you walk away and you go, I don't get it. And then you look at it again and there's a lot of action. It's fantastic. It's great. It makes you laugh, and but it's like watching a stand-up comedian, with the one-liners, and you're going, okay, I don't get the story. I don't know the message. Yeah, so glad you said that because again, like I said, there's a lot of the film effects, and I think a lot of people go for that, the fancy stuff, but don't sacrifice the story. We still need to know. We still need to get it from beginning to end.
Exactly.
The
And if I
the
can add a
story of what
fourth,
the message.
exactly. And if I can let
Yeah, yeah.
in a
Hmm.
fourth tip, it's to not let your ego get in the way. So back
Hmm.
in school, you could tell who thought they were head honcho because they knew all about cameras and stuff. But then you watch their video and you're like, why did you spend 3 hours on that? Like, there's no message, there's nothing. Please do not
Right.
let your ego get in the way. Like, at the end of the day, just how journalism, they call it a thankless job. When you're creating films, it's
Yeah.
about the people in the film. It's not about you. Unless you make a film about yourself, then obviously that's different. But it's never about you as the filmmaker. So don't make it about yourself. Don't make it about wanting to show all of your tricks just to prove that you can do it all. You know,
Hmm.
balance is key, and just knowing your place as a filmmaker. Um, I think
Yeah.
that's really important.
Yeah. Suppress the ego is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Watch the ego. So the four things: pre-production, lighting, balance, and get rid of the ego.
yeah,
Yes, good. Four tips for you filmmakers out there, all of you sitting on a couch wondering when you can jump up there and get that project going. So here are four tips to get that documentary on the road. So Ashley, I've been chomping at the bit to dive into this. You just mentioned journalism, and I so wanted to get into this. How much of what you do is impelled by that journalistic nature?
I'd say it's about a 60-40 split. I wouldn't say it's entirely 50-50. That journalism bug is sometimes a little bit stronger than the creative piece because,
Right.
again, like the storyline is just so important to me in everything that I do, but I
Hmm.
take creativity very seriously. So journalism gets a little bit of a win on this one. Um,
Okay.
but I'd say they're almost half and half.
So I want to ask you. I watched that piece of the record, it's called, and that's the background of what you go through as a journalist. I want to start with, on a general level, tell us some of the challenges of getting in there and getting people to A, return your call, talk to you, agree to do this, and then B, open up, because those are two different things. So tell us the challenge of that.
Yeah, so off the record, that was a very tough one to create.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. So my friend Jackson and I, we produced that film as part of our digital film and TV class for our final because he was going into TV news and I was interested in broadcasting, and he was just like interested in learning more about these things. So it just seemed like a great fit. And I cannot even describe the amount of phone calls and emails I've sent to reporters of color. And granted, there are not many in the New England area, especially in Vermont, but so many of them,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that they didn't want to speak to us, it's that the news executive would not really like allow them or would discourage them from speaking. so that was an issue. And there were some who were just a little on the fence, like, ooh, do I really want to put my story out there to get critiques from people? And the ones that I
Hmm.
had spoken to in the film were like, people can say what, they want. It's my story. I'm going to share it. So we made do with what we were able to get, but that was really difficult.
But isn't it what journalism is about? You have a story, you tell it, you share it with the world. Why is it people litigation? People don't want to get sued. People are they don't have confidence in their story. Why do you think there's that hesitation?
So I'll give you an anecdote when I interned at a news station in Vermont, because that's kind of
Hmm.
when things started to piece together. So I interned at a television news station. Things went well in the interview over the phone, to do on camera reporting interning. And once they saw me in person, face to face, that was a different story. I was not allowed to do any on screen reporting because of my hair texture. And those are experiences that a lot of reporters in Vermont had, whether it be with hair or just a lot of microaggressions, being forced to be like the face of diversity when it came to certain stories. There were a lot of experiences, and I learned all of this just from talking to those reporters, off record, not for off the record, the film. Um, and
Hmm.
that's kind of when things piece together. It's not a great work environment, and I'm not speaking on behalf of all publications. I did intern at one, and it was absolutely wonderful. I had a lot of great support from the staff, but the experiences are very varied, and the newsrooms are not very diverse. So I could see why people would have hesitation. At the time when I was producing the film with my friend, I didn't really understand, like, oh, well, what's the big deal? Journalists, we share our stories. Like, why are we so scared to do it? But once you're in that newsroom, it just all made sense to me.
So, are you saying, because you mentioned something earlier coming from New York, going to Vermont, because New York is a very cosmopolitan community, and going to Vermont, I've never been to Vermont. So, let's start out by saying that I don't know what the culture and the ethos is there. I don't know what the response would be to me. Of course, I always get a different response everywhere I go. Um, So, are you saying that when you moved from New York to Vermont, that you started to experience a different kind of reaction to you as a person?
Oh, absolutely. Like,
Okay.
back here at home in New York, I didn't really have many experiences with
Mm-hmm.
racism. If anything, like, I have, what's called like the light skin privilege, because I'm very light, which is,
Mm-hmm.
very much a real thing that people of lighter complexions experience. And
Mm-hmm.
so school was very interesting, like people having these preconceived notions of what I'd sound like. So people saying, oh, well, you don't sound how you look. I'm like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? I'm
Mm-hmm.
just a person. Um, or just, microaggressions. Those are things I never really experienced. So that was a really big culture shock for me, going
Mm-hmm.
to Vermont. But it was also a big growth experience because New York is diverse, but I got to experience what it's like being in other parts of the country, and what it's like when you are in other, and how do you handle microaggressions? How do you handle when certain things are said? When do you respond? When do you not? When do you call in? When do you call out? Those are all lessons I've had to learn over the past 4 years.
Right. Give me an example of now. Marlon mentioned something, and again, that piece, that watching that clip, it was very eye-opening for me. There were things that were mentioned there that I never really thought of. Now, I have been in the United States about three decades, and I've experienced a lot of different things. And when I first came here, I didn't I didn't have a concept of this because I grew up in a culture where there's a miscegenation of six different races, and the emphasis was never on the color of your skin or your ethnicity. There were always warring factors to get power, and that was about getting power. Who's going to run the country? It wasn't. of course, the Indians or the Hindus and Muslims were always fighting, but the other internal strife was always about who's going to become the president. So coming to America, I didn't have this concept of we're going to treat you differently because of what we look at you and see. So a lot of the things that I experienced in my first 5, 6 years went, and it was psychologically, it affected me because I felt like I was getting the cousin it treatment. I had no idea the treatment I was getting. I didn't acquaint it with anything because I had no frame of reference. When I started learning and understanding the dynamics in the United States, then, and by the time that hit me, then they started discriminating against Indian people. So then I got that discrimination. So it seems like there was always something. But I'm still learning as what you call them microaggressions. I see it, but I don't think it hits me as it would hit someone growing up here who already knows they have an Aesopian knowledge of it, the underlying current of it, which I don't have. So it doesn't lay on me the same way it would someone else. I might see something, but I might attribute something else to it. So walk me through some of that. And I want to read to you something that Marlon Hyde said. He mentioned the Freddie Gray issue. He said, the only thing, the very first line, and I read it, the very first line the journalist said is that he's a son of an illiterate heroin addict. And I looked at that and I thought to myself, yeah, why do we have to identify him as that? Could you just say Freddie Gray, son of a carpenter or something? Why do we have to lay that foundation, lay that message out there immediately? So is that, I'm sure that's one of the microaggressions you're talking about. Tell me some more
Yeah,
that
so
you
that
experienced.
Yeah, so I will say on the Freddie Gray piece, that ties into the whole thing we were talking about this show, which is identity. Because
Hmm.
Freddie Gray, that was an incident of police brutality, and that could have been anyone, of darker skin,
Hmm.
anyone in the Black community. And I especially think about, younger children who are growing up in, the BLM era, when they see something like that, how do they interpret it? How do they see themselves in that? So I thought it was really interesting that you brought up that piece, because it instantly made a connection and a question in my head, like what effect does that have on identity, for people who are Black? But also the perception of the Black community just from having headlines of that, how damaging that could be. Um, so that did strike a chord with me, that you mentioned that.
Hmm. Hmm. I want to ask you this though. Again, as I said, I've been here 30 years and I am currently in Atlanta. I have been in Atlanta about a month and a half now, and I have experienced a lot of things that I've not experienced in other places. And a lot of it has been from the Black community. And in fact, I had a conversation with one fellow, and his exact words were that we kind of self perpetuate. He's talking about himself and the Black community. He said we kind of self perpetuate because some of the things that happen, we are ourselves perpetuating it in the way we treat each other and the way we uh, act in the community. And I've examined that, and I'll tell you this in the aspect for me, I'm going to put it in something that I've examined for a very long time: women and the degradation of women, and the degradation of women from men. And I've looked at the way that women deal with each other and treat each other. And I can't help but think that this is the reason that the men treat you like this, because you act in this way and you act to each other in this way. That For instance, the calling of each other bitch. I don't think that's an endearing term. And when you do that, you are degrading yourself, you're degrading the other person, and you're telling the other people in the community that it's okay to do this. So I think there's a message being sent there that, yeah, you can call us bitch. Now, if I call you a bitch, the danger in that is I'm going to start treating you as a bitch. And that's the danger in that. And this is the thing, for instance, people they in the black community they call each other nigger. Okay, you can't complain against it and use it at the same time, because when the minute you use it, you're regarding each other as that term, and your body language will speak in that sense. And it's kind of hard to break it when it keeps being perpetuated. So tell me in the sense that you see it, because again, for me, I feel like I am half in, half out, because I didn't grow up here. I don't have all those things laying on my psyche. But then I've been here enough that I've seen it, and I know exactly the racism, the microaggressions, as you mentioned, I've seen it. But again, I don't interpret it as someone who grew up here would interpret it. So I have the advantage to be able to look at it a little bit objectively. So tell
Mhm.
me your view. Mhm.
I'd say it's pretty complicated. Like for me, it's not a word that I use. It's complicated because I am mixed. So just how you mentioned feeling half
Mhm.
in, half out, like I do feel like I kind of tread on those
Mhm.
waters. So for me, it's just a matter of not using it. Like that's not a term that's used in my
Right.
household. And my dad is black, but that is not something that he uses either because he believes it's just a very degrading term. And, why normalize
Mhm.
that in our everyday vocabulary? That's his perspective.
Precisely.
Um, but I think it's a very complicated topic. I feel like it's hard for me to
Mhm.
answer because I feel like I don't have the privilege to use the word in the first place. Um,
Mhm.
but I do think it's interesting, like if the whole who can say it, who can't. Um, but if we
Exactly.
don't
Yeah.
want people to use the word, why are we normalizing it in society? I think those questions do circulate over my head, and I wish I had an answer.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
genuinely don't, because I think it really is a very dicey subject. Some people are
Mhm.
very pro the word, and some people, like my father or myself, are, just choose not to use it.
But I think when we live in a community and we have to be aware of how our actions, it's like we're talking about identity, the things we do leaves a mark and influence other people. So we do have to be careful as to the message that we're sending, the image we're portraying for others around us, and especially the equivocal nature of what our nonverbal message is. But the question I had asked you is what do you think contributes to the what you mentioned at your experience as a journalist in Vermont? What are the factors that you see over there? Because I wasn't in Vermont and I didn't do journalism. So I'm curious to know, based on these aspects that we're talking about, where we could see contributory behavior, what do you think contributes to that sort of responses or that sort of corralling of people of different ethnicity in that community?
This is going to upset a lot of Vermonters, but resistance to change. So this is something
Mhm.
I've talked a lot about with people, even people I'm close with who live in Vermont who agree. Vermont loves to paint
Mhm.
this image of we are so liberal, we love social change, but when people actually try to do things, it's a problem. And that resistance to change is very loud in many newsrooms, not all, because I was at one that was very progressive, who liked to rock the boat when it came to, didn't really like to shy away from social topics to upset people. Um, but I had the complete opposite experience at another one. And it's just really
Mhm.
interesting to me, like how in New York City it's becoming more normalized to see reporters who have box braids, who have natural hair. I remember when I came home from spring break, after I was at that TV news station, and I saw someone on the local news. You know, she was very dark skinned and she had an afro. I was like, wow, that's beautiful. Why is that a problem in another state? Like, what is the issue? You know, if
Hmm.
we, you know, you can't preach one thing and do the other thing. So I honestly think
Precisely.
it's the resistance to change. That's the issue in the state, and people in Vermont can get mad all they want. But unfortunately, that's just the truth. And it's not everyone who's
Hmm.
resistant to change. It's oftentimes the people in power who have the power to make the decisions are the ones who are most reluctant to make those changes.
Do you think that this is happening on a cognitive level or on a subconscious level where this is so, as we grow in societies, we're acculturated to the norms, the habits, and the mores of a culture, of our family first, and then the society around us. And a lot of things we don't question, we don't think about, we just do because someone before us did it. Do you think that this wave is on a subconscious level, or do you think that this resistance you talk about is on a conscious level? And if it is, then it would be that they have a specific, and more than likely it's always money. There's a financial and economic reason to maintain the status quo rather than change. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd say both, and here's why. So, going into the conscious part, I mean, one thing that really woke me up to what was happening to me in that newsroom, because I did have the whole thing in my head where, oh, maybe I'm just imagining this, maybe I am being treated just fine and I am the problem, was seeing how my white peers who interned there were treated so much differently, who were given all of the opportunities that I was denied. um, and you know, I had a very strong work ethic. I take everything I do very seriously. I did all that I was asked and more. And it just became very clear what the issue was, and unfortunately it was, you know, hair on my head, color of my skin, it is what it is. But you know, in DEI training we talk a lot about subconscious bias. It's just something that we all have. And I remember there were things said in the newsroom that were very questionable. And it just seemed very natural for some people to make insensitive comments like that. So to that extent, I think, you know, maybe it could be subconscious. Maybe people are just programmed to think that way to the point where they
Hmm.
can't even fully understand what they're saying. So to that end,
Yeah.
I'd say both.
Um, do you mind sharing some of the things that were said?
I'll share one of the things that were said that wasn't as
Okay.
bad. I remember
Hmm.
I was at the TV news station, and one of the producers was like, she said to one of the other producers, "Oh, do you speak Puerto Rican?" And everyone was just like laughing. Um, I don't really know why she would say that, and I don't know why people thought
Hmm.
it was funny, but it's just, you know, things like that, that just
Hmm.
make me question: are people just programmed like that, um,
Yeah.
or was it actually conscious? So it's a really good question, subconscious or conscious, but I do think it's both.
Yeah. Did you read that book, White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo?
Oh, yes, I did a few years ago.
Because she mentioned exactly that. That some of the things that were said in jest and people laugh, and it's like they shared a joke, and people, and I think that's what they, it's this common language. And I really think that it's so internalized that people don't realize what they're saying. In your clip off the record, Anne Wallace Allen, she's from Australia, she made a comment that as a journalist, when she would talk with people, someone said to her, she mentioned one time that she was from Australia and she's here now. And the person said to her, "Oh, perhaps we'll let you stay."
Yeah,
Do
I
you
remember
remember
that.
that in your video?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we made
And
sure to
and
keep
I've
that
I've
part
gotten
in.
comments. Yeah, and I've gotten comments like that. In fact, yesterday I went down to the post office to get a PO box. I'm in Georgia. And this man was so adamant. he's telling me, you're not a resident here, you can't get a box. And he even refused to give me the paper. He kept saying, ma'am, you can't get, it's almost like he's laughing at me. And then he said, go to your state and get a box. And I'm thinking, are you serious? And and I'm looking at him and thinking, you have to know what you're saying. This couldn't be on a subconscious level. And it was a black fellow. And I'm thinking, but like I said, I think what I'm experiencing in Atlanta is what you've experienced in Vermont. I've traveled to 53 countries, lived in 19. I've never had that. What I've experienced in Georgia, I sometimes it takes I ask myself, did I change countries? Am I in a different, oh no, I'm still in the US of A. It's surprising. It's just very surprising. Um Interesting that you made a comment just now. You said you started wondering, am I the problem? This is a very interesting thing, and it goes back to again what we're talking about, identity. And I think a lot of times when we experience this sort of thing, that we're made to look at ourselves because what's happening around us is not normal, or our view of normalcy, immediately we go to, we internalize, we go, am I the problem? I'm going to switch it for a little bit and ask you something. Do you think, let's look at male females. Do you think men ask themselves that
I think
when they
so.
encounter a problem? You think they do?
I think so. And that's mainly
Okay.
based on my experiences just talking to Marlon. So he's also a
Mm-hmm.
friend of mine. He's actually now in Atlanta. So it's very funny how this is so full
Mm-hmm.
circle. He's a business reporter there.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But he had similar experiences when he was interning or working with microaggressions or certain opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
being given to other people. And he told me that, he would start to question and ask, am I crazy? But one of the things he told me before
Mm-hmm.
he graduated is that you're not crazy. It's not you.
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah.
really stuck with me. And throughout my whole experience at that news station, I just had to keep reminding myself, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I have two eyes, I can see what's happening. I can feel it. My gut's not wrong. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I would say I think men do have the
They
ability.
do.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Because I've heard that from a lot of women, and especially children, when trauma happens and things happen like divorce or any sort of trauma as a child, immediately you go to, I'm the problem. And I see it more prevalent even in adulthood with women. People, they always think, oh, maybe it's me. And I find it interesting how that is our first go-to. It's and I'm curious to know why that is always our first, as a human, why we always go there first. Why do we not say, these people are crazy?
Yeah, I
We
would love to
always
know.
yeah, we always go first and go, am I the problem? Now, growing up, I did that for, and this is due to things in my childhood. But I reached a stage in my life where, and this turn of events happened a long time ago, where I looked around and I go, this one is a little loco. I'm going to leave. You're crazy. It's not me. I just know it couldn't be me. So I wonder when that switch happens in a person, because I know for me it's years of understanding who I am, what I do, why I do what I do, and then when you see something that is not following along with what you feel is a resident normalcy, then you go, something's a little off here, and I think it's you. I don't. Even though I'm the minority here because it's just one of me, it's 10 of you. I still think it's you. I'm going
Yeah.
to go. So I'd be interested in exploring that, where that switch happens, where you start to really become settled in yourself and understanding who you are, and not turning that on you. to think that you're the problem. But it's a very interesting comment because it's very, very common. I want to ask you, you mentioned DEI training. What is DEI training?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So
Okay, okay.
yeah, so
So
those
you had,
trainings.
was this?
Oh, sorry. So those trainings would include like there'd be someone coming in and just teaching about like conscious and subconscious and unconscious bias, and just like how we
Hmm.
could be better. Do the trainings work? Do they not? That's a controversial topic in and of itself. I don't really know if I have the answer to that question.
Hmm.
But I do think they can help people to have more self awareness, of how they think, how they perceive others, and how they treat others.
Hmm. Hmm. What challenges, because you, when you do your documentary and you have to go out and you interview people, and in that clip you showed a lot of, persistent phone calls, really working to get people to open to you, to talk to you. If you were to give tips to future documentarians, what would you tell them? What is that technique to get people, because it comes down to trust? What is that technique to get people to trust you and talk to you?
Well, I would say so. There are two different pieces. It's one, making sure you have a super set plan. Because if
Hmm.
you're reaching out to someone you don't know and they think you don't really know what your film is about, like, how are you going to get them to trust you and actually want to talk to you? That's number
Hmm.
one. But number two, understanding the issue that you're covering, like having a very deep understanding and making sure that's communicated when you reach out. When you do your initial, whether it's email or phone call, maybe there was some research or some studies that informed your topic. Don't feel afraid to point those out, when you're pitching your topic to a source and asking if they're interested. You don't have to give them a whole entire paper on that research, but just show that you have knowledge, or even, the other people you interview too.
Hmm.
Be like, hey, I'm interviewing so and so and so and so and so and so. This is what the film is about. It's based on some research that I found on XYZ. And that can also help a lot.
Hmm.
So in the case,
So what?
with journalism, with Off the Record, it was as we started getting more interviews, it was, oh wait, we also talked to this person and this person, and then the person would be like, oh yeah, I know them, they're pretty good, yeah, I'll do the film. When do you want to schedule a time?
Hmm.
So that is a really good tactic, that I would definitely
Mm.
incorporate. But be
The
persistent because some
association.
yeah, exactly. But being persistent is so
Hmm.
important because, especially, you'll find that once you cover harder and harder topics, it's going to become much more difficult to get people to talk to you. And that
Hmm.
goes to what we were saying this whole time. It's not you who's the problem. You're just uncovering something that can be very controversial that people may want to be off the record about, not to throw in a pun.
Hmm. Have you ever encountered where people say, "Sure, I'll talk to you, but I have to be anonymous." Do that fuzzy face, and you've had that.
Yeah, I've had that. I was the executive editor of our student publication, and I remember I was doing a story on COVID and how public safety was giving a lot of fines for pretty nonsensical things. There were a lot of people who had great stories but wanted to be anonymous because they were afraid, that they'd become
Hmm.
targeted. When I was at Vermont Digger. It's one of the largest publications in Vermont. It was a great place to intern, and sometimes when I'd cover hot button topics, people would ask to be anonymous. Um,
Hmm.
Anonymity, there are some instances when it's okay. It's usually up to the editors, but I think there was only one time I was able to have an anonymous source, and that was for the student publication. But yeah, I
Hmm.
have had people who wanted to be faceless or nameless.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I've had a good couple of those, which for me, and you said this is when you were working with an organization.
Yes.
Yeah, but not in a documentary.
Yeah, no, this was not in documentary. I'm not sure if in documentary I've had someone who wanted to be anonymous.
Hmm.
I don't think I've dealt with that in the video sense, but I have when it came to written stories and breaking news and stuff like that.
Right, right. I want to give the audience a little sneak peek at what we're going to talk about next week, because that uh, highly controversial. A lot of things I want to really dive into with that, and tell us a little bit about the documentary that you did. Just a sneak peek on that documentary with the children.
Television is not what it used to be. It
Hmm.
is the third parent. It's very vague,
Right,
but I'm going to leave it at that because, as you will
right.
see next week, hopefully you tune in to learn more about that web documentary. But there are a lot of changes in the children's media and entertainment industry that we need to talk about. And I will just leave this one little tidbit. One of the inspirations for me pursuing that topic was the fact that when I was doing a lot of research, I realized that a lot of documentaries that were about children's media and the industry were done decades ago, but we're in such this ever-changing landscape that I felt the need to do something right here, right now. Um, so
Yeah,
that's all I'll leave
yeah.
you with.
And I agree. I think it started out as a wonderful idea, and somewhere along the way it got very perverted, and the effects that we're seeing that it's having on children is not I'm sure we didn't plan it, but you have a very unique approach and insight on that aspect and children in television and the TV landscape with children. And so I really want to dive into that next week. So we'll leave them with that. And thank you again for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. And of course, for our viewers, if every week we bring a global film producer, because our mission here is to promote global collaboration and the exchange of cross cultural ideas and instruction. And if you'd like to be on the show, send us an email, thefilmscene@gmail.com. We'd love to chat with you and have you come on and share your knowledge and insight with our audience. So, Ashley, again, thank you. And I will see you, we'll have you back next week. Don't go away, hang tight.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank you so
much
much
for
for
having
watching.
me. Oh, sorry.
Yes, you're welcome. Oh, it's okay. No, no, no. Thank you for watching. Thanks to my producer, Charlie Kuhn. Stay safe. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Thanks, Ashley. Don't go
Thank
away.
you.